Hello and welcome everyone to our next episode of our podcast here at Mosaic Medical. Today I'm joined by Dr Andie Siggers, one of the founding directors of Mosaic, and we're going to talk about a very popular subject, strength training for women, and what we wish our patients knew about it. Welcome, Andie. I know this is a subject that's very close to your heart.
It really is. I think there's a lot of buzz about it at the moment, a lot of conversation about it, but I think some of it is maybe been nuanced in a way that is not really what the science says. And I think we've got such an opportunity here to change the culture of how we view exercise in women, looking at the science.
No, I completely agree. I think it's something that a lot of academics are already talking about. But like you said, there's nuance. And really, sometimes you need to be thinking about the patient sitting in front of you and giving them practical advice that actually means something to them.
I think so, yeah. And I think there's also that sense that for women, it's not necessarily where we've felt comfortable. You know, even now, if you go into a gym, then women tend to be steered towards the pilates classes and the swimming pool and the spa and all the nice things. They don't get steered towards the bench press rack, so therefore we end up feeling uncomfortable walking towards that bit.
Yeah, just because it's intimidating, but there are ways around that, and we're going to try to pick apart some of that as well as the science. So to start off with, as you know, I always like for my guests to introduce themselves and explain a little bit about their background. But for you more specifically, could you tell us a little bit about your own experience with strength training? Because I know it's been quite an important part of your life, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I think probably I go back to my story with exercise in general. So at school, when I was a kid, I was 100% the last person to be chosen for all sports teams. So I have zero hand-eye coordination. I can't catch, I can't throw, I can't kick. So I left school not a sporty girl and assumed that was just me. I wasn't one of those sporty kids. It took quite a long time for me to realise that there were other sports out there that did not involve a ball, which sounds ridiculous, but I think that was the way it was. At school, it was hockey and netball or nothing. So I then got gradually into running, but just gently. And running, I earn my running. It doesn't come naturally at all. I have to try really, really hard. But I've done quite a lot of it over the years. Then my family, I've got a family history of Alzheimer's disease. And my grandpa had it, and watching him go downhill and watching what that did to the rest of my family was really hard. And he was, relatively speaking, relatively young. So he was in his early 70s when he lost his life to it. And that stays with you. And when you're a doctor, you think, how can I prevent that? And there's always been that sense of you can't. And then bit by bit, the research is coming through that says, actually, maybe you can. And then you look at the research and saying, what can I do personally to prevent Alzheimer's? And the amount of information out there of what you can do is absolutely enormous. So I then went and did my own genetic testing. So the nutrigenomic testing. So thinking of that as being, where are my risk profiles? So the genes that we sort of talk about as being written in pencil rather than pen. You can't change your genes, but you can look at genes that you can turn on and off, and genes that code for proteins that are more or less effective in one area or one function of your body. And in doing that, I discovered that for me, I've got a really, really big risk factor. And that risk factor is in relation to a chemical called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I simply don't make that very easily. And that's a really important chemical to reduce your risk of dementia. Well, having discovered that, you then go on to realise that BDNF is stimulated and the levels go up significantly with exercise. Now, I can't think of anything more motivating, personally, of this is a thing that for me will make a difference to my risk for the disease that runs in my family. That will make a big difference. So that's when I got properly into exercise. So that's when I started doing exercise in general and started realising I needed it to be a part of my life forever. And then when you work on that bit by bit, you go from hating it to putting up with it and doing it because it's good for you to loving it. And now I'm at the stage where I love the process of it, not just the results from it. But also that changes the goal from the bikini body, which I'm not sure I'll ever have, but it changes it from that to being a this is how I future-proof for myself. And I don't know if it'll work, but it's certainly going to reduce my risk. It can't reduce my risk to zero, but it's reducing my risk from where it was before.
And that's one of the most evidence-based ways of altering the trajectory of your personal health.
Of my personal health, yeah. Because the other genes, I don't have anything obvious that flags out. Okay, so obviously there's other things that my grandfather may have been doing with his life that were not helpful for him. So I can only control my part. So that's when I got into exercise. Then, being a woman of a certain age, you hit menopause. Okay, and when I hit menopause, and suddenly everything gets harder, there's a few challenges that happen, and the spare tire arrives around your middle, and you don't feel right, and do you have HRT? Do you not have HRT? And then I started looking at the research behind what sort of exercise. Okay, and then on a really personal level, this doesn't suit everybody, but on a personal level, that's when I got into high rocks training and started absolutely loving high rocks. It's also when we shifted across from doing a lot of running. So my husband and I used to do ultra marathons, which are not good for you at my age. So I then shifted across to doing high rocks and joined an extraordinary gym that made a huge difference. So I joined that gym knowing I wanted to do exercise. So that gym, bit of a shout out, is called Emotion Fitness in Poole. It's brilliant. It's brilliant for a number of reasons, which I'm going to come on to because I think they're really important. But emotion changed my approach to exercise. Okay. Now,
in what way?
What made that gym different? There are no mirrors. Okay. So obviously, when it comes to strength training, you do need to have really good technique. And some people might say mirrors will help you with that technique. I would suggest that that's what coaches are for. And if you're in a class, a coach should be spotting you and telling you if your technique's not right. But for me, that means that I will go in there in workout stuff and not feel self-conscious. That's the first thing. The second thing was this huge emphasis on what this does for our mental health. The whole gym is focused on, we do this in order to be well in ourselves. The gym is called Emotion. It is a welcoming place for people of every walk of life, every body shape, both genders. And, if people are struggling to get to the end of a fitness class, everybody else in the class will encourage them until they get there. And I think that is really powerful. So it suddenly was a place that I felt like I could fit in. And then bit by bit, you learn about the science of strength work. So can I go on to getting into my zone and get deep into the science?
Before you do that, can I ask a question about something you said?
Of course you can.
You said that ultramarathons aren't good for you at your age. Could you just elaborate on why that is?
I'm not sure ultramarathons are really good for any of us, but they make you feel good. So I did 100-kilometre in a day marathon. It's just an awful lot of pounding through joints. So it's a long way. And as you're training, as you're doing it, it's all about trying to avoid injury. And I think really exercise should be about getting more and more healthy and not simply, can I avoid injury?
Yeah, because you're pushing your body to its kind of maximum limit, aren't you?
Yeah.
And if you need ambulances lined up at a health event, just in case, maybe that's not a good sign.
And also looking at the science behind it, as a woman, endurance training. Now, I still run. I run partly because I like high rocks. I also run because it clears my head. I can walk, I can go out the door, go for a run, come back, and I've not thought about anything, and yet I've made a decision. Okay, so that's really important. So in women, we know endurance training can put your cortisol up. If you put your cortisol up, that can put your blood sugar up, which can mean that you then lay down fat more easily. And it can take a long time for that cortisol to come back down again. Men, it tends to go up and come down quicker. So women, endurance training is not really what's physically good for us, even if going for a run does clear your head a bit. So, I shifted away from that endurance work. So then looking at the science of strength training, particularly when you hit my age, in your cells, you've got mitochondria. So mitochondria are the batteries in your cells. So that is what creates energy. Not just energy for running around, but energy for every single cellular function. So thinking, for example, uses a lot of mitochondria. Now, what they've now discovered is that women have estrogen receptors on their mitochondria. If you're a woman who is not yet menopausal or perimenopausal, then those estrogen receptors being stimulated enables women to use fat as a fuel really easily. So Men are off doing their zone 2 training for hours on end. So zone 2 is when you train at a low heart rate in order to train your body to use fat as a fuel. Women are really good at using fat as a fuel already, so they don't really need to do that. Okay.
I
now,
didn't know that.
when you get to menopause and your estrogen levels become a bit less reliable, okay, so when you hit perimenopause, your estrogen levels become much more fluctuating. Post-menopause, they drop right down. If you're on HRT, yes, you've got estrogen, but it's still not as well controlled as it was before you went through this stage. When you hit that stage, you're no longer stimulating those estrogen receptors. Because you're not stimulating them, the fat doesn't know where to go, which is one of the reasons why when you hit perimenopause, you tend to put on some weight, which a lot of women are not comfortable with. So given that happens, that is a point where we literally are trying to con your body into still stimulating those receptors. The most effective way of doing that is with strength work. If you do strength work, it has the same processes and it has the same effect on your body as having the estrogen stimulating those receptors.
No one's ever explained that to me, ever. I've always had thought, okay, you hit perimenopause, menopause, and then something shifts. And a lot of people misunderstand it and think it's because your metabolism changes. And then I've been taught, well, no, it's actually because your muscle mass you potentially have allowed your muscle mass to slowly decline from the age of 30. And if you haven't done anything about it, you've got less muscle. Yes, maybe that affects your basal metabolic rate a little bit, but also it massively affects your insulin sensitivity. And then appetite signals can change a little bit around perimenopause and menopause as well. But the fact that it has to do with your mitochondria and their conversation with estrogen blows my mind.
Isn't that amazing? And on top of that, yes, there's a muscle mass issue because people quite often have not looked after their muscle mass because our muscle mass also goes down every decade beyond 30. It goes down. So if you think about what you want to do when you're in your 70s and 80s, if you want to pick up your grandchildren in your 70s and 80s, you need to start thinking about your strength now. So getting yourself in a really good position for that future. Then we move on to the bone health part. So bone health, when we hit perimenopause and menopause, we start worrying about osteoporosis, so bone thinning. You don't get symptoms from osteoporosis. It's not the same as arthritis. You don't get any symptoms until you break a bone. But your bones just become more fragile. And one of the most effective ways of preventing them becoming fragile is to have muscle around them. So muscle releases chemicals called myokines. Those myokines protect the bones, but they only protect the bones in the local area. So if you're worried about breaking your hip or breaking your back, hip fractures being one of the biggest things that stop people living independently in the future, you can't do pilates to sort out your hip fracture. Risk. You have to do exercise that strengthens the muscles around that joint. So what we need to be doing is a progressive loading. Okay. So you want to be doing exercise that's heavy, that's hard, and bit by bit over time, it gets heavier as you get stronger. Yeah. Now, the other part to that is you don't want to get injured. So it's quite a hard thing to do completely on your own. Because you really do need somebody to check that you're doing it right. And I think there is a need for gyms to become increasingly affordable, to have these high quality gyms where you can do strength work and people get checked. I think there is an issue at the moment with the fact that independent gyms, there's still VAT on things. And I think this is preventative medicine and there shouldn't be. That's me going into the politics part of it, which I'm not a political person, but I think that, being physically active is preventative medicine. So what we want to be doing is this progressive overload around the joints that matter for our future. Yes, it changes your body shape. But what happens first is your body shape changes a little bit. Okay. You put on weight. People don't like that. But that's because muscle is heavier than fat. As things tighten up, you find that you lose some of that weight and your body shape is different. So you can end up with a body shape that you're happy with again.
And equally, you might end up not noticing much difference in weight, for example, but you notice a change in the shape of your body. And that can be really demoralizing for people because the way they track whether something is making a difference is they keep standing on the scales every day. On the surface, it looks like they're just plateauing and nothing's actually happening. But in reality, they're completely changing their biology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can I just clarify? This is a stupid question, but just if we go backwards, the impact of the mitochondria and their conversation with estrogen through resistance training and strength training, is it because you're increasing the quantity and the quality of the mitochondria, or is it specifically about the receptor?
So it's more, separate those two things out. So you've got the estrogen receptors on the mitochondria that have done this job for the first sort of half of your life. The second half of your life, when you haven't got that reliable source of estrogen in the same way, that's when the resistance and strength training do the similar job, where they do lots of what's called mitogenesis. So they help with you making new mitochondria, and they help with you being able to use fat as a fuel source still.
See, okay. Yeah, so you're kind of compensating for the reduction in estrogen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're finding a way to make your body work the way that it was designed to work, even though the ingredients have changed.
Okay, that's really fascinating. And so one of the reasons we wanted to spend more time talking about this in the context of women is that there's a lot of talk about exercise research, and people are pointing out frequently that women aren't just small men. We have completely different physiology. In what ways do you think the way we approach exercise, I know we've already touched on some of them, but if you were to talk to your daughter, for example, how would you explain that exercise is going to be different for her than for your son, for example?
So one of the ways that's different is how we fuel for exercise. So two parts to that. Part one is, for years and years and years, I used to exercise fasted. So you wake up in the morning, go and do your exercise, come home and eat. We now know that's a really good thing for men. It's a really bad thing for women. So for women, if you exercise fasted, then you put up your cortisol and then it takes 6 hours to come down again. So for women, you need to have some amount of protein and carbohydrate before you exercise, and ideally really quite quickly afterwards as well. So ideally a little something before you do your exercise and then a proper breakfast afterwards. Whereas with men, exercising fasted is a really good way to do it. So we are completely different in that. I mean, you couldn't get more different.
And it's, again, all related to the cortisol side of things, like it was
all related
before.
to the cortisol side of things. The other thing that I think is really important to flag is the women, particularly younger women, are quite often at high risk of something called REDS, so relative energy deficiency syndrome. It's a really key area where, because women have a certain physique that has been made popular by culture, by media, by all of that, there is this desire to look a certain way. And sometimes if you are an athletic person, if you're doing a lot of sport, your natural body shape that will enable you to do that best is maybe not the same as culture would like it to be. And that can leave you in a slightly difficult situation. And also, if you are going out for a meal with your friends, and because of the amount of exercise you do, you really ought to be having twice what they're having, women don't particularly like to do that. So you can end up in this situation where you have what's called a relative energy deficiency, which means that you're eating, but you're not eating enough to keep up with the amount of exercise you're doing. When that happens, your body thinks you're in starvation mode, so it switches off your hormones. Okay, so when that happens, women can stop having their periods. If you stop having your periods, you stop having the estrogen, which then puts you at higher risk of fractures and higher risk of the bone thinning, and can lead to things like stress fractures. So the first treatment for that is to eat enough to keep up with what's going on. And that can be really difficult. So that's different to men as well. They don't tend to be as at risk because the concept of bulking up in a male culture is seen as a positive.
Isn't that ironic though? Everyone thinks that if they're doing loads of exercise, they're protecting their bones. But actually for women, there's a scenario where they could be harming their bone health without realizing it.
Yeah, you have to fuel for what you're doing. And if we're looking at health for longevity, so I'm going to say reword that, health for health span, as in what my goal is to remain healthy for a long time. Okay, it's not necessarily just to live a long time. I want to be healthy for the duration of that as much as I have control over. So if that is your goal, is to remain healthy, that's not necessarily the same as if your goal is to win a gold at the Olympics. Okay, if your goal is to win a gold at the Olympics, that is not actually conducive to a long health span. They are two different things.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I suppose a lot of women who train really vigorously and perhaps are not eating enough, they might not realize they're not eating enough because they might assume, oh, well, I'm not losing weight, so everything must be fine. But I suppose the body can compensate, can't it? Because it will do everything it can to hang on to the fat stores that it needs as a bare minimum. And really, because it's compensating and sending less energy to other places, then you still end up having a negative impact on your health, even if you're not losing weight.
One good barometer of that is if somebody's missing their periods. If you're missing your periods and you're doing a lot of sport, then you probably ought to go and see someone and get checked.
Okay. That's really good to note, because I think amongst athletes, it's almost been normalized that it's just understood that you lose your period. And no one has ever really questioned whether that's okay. But clearly, we're making a very clear point. That's not okay for your long-term health. Not okay. You need to do something about it.
It's also not okay for your goals as an athlete. You know, if you miss your periods and therefore start to get bone thinning, you're much more likely to get injured. Okay, so if you've got a really driven athletic career, you don't want to get injured because that will put paid to your career. So it is the goals for that at that point are the same.
Long term as well, for other aspects of life and health, if you've lost your period, it can actually take quite a long time for it to come back. I think a lot of people assume that once they stop the exercising, it will just snap back, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone. So if you do want to have children, it can take much longer, can't it? And that's something that I think people just aren't really talking about. Absolutely. I suppose when it comes to strength training for women in particular, it can also be good for fertility, actually, on the flip side, when you think about things like PCOS.
Absolutely. So PCOS has been renamed. So PCOS is now PMOS. Okay, so PMOS has been renamed because PCOS is a metabolic syndrome. Okay, this is a condition of your metabolism. So we need to come away from just thinking of it being ovaries that have got some cysts on and move towards this being a full body condition that is to do with the way your metabolism works. And strength training, quite simply, moves your metabolism closer to being the way it would be if you didn't have that condition. Okay, so sometimes we need to not overcomplicate things and just think, look, strength training just helps you move back towards a less impacted by PMOS condition.
And just like with perimenopause and menopause, strength training is like this equalizer almost. It compensates for outside factors that just brings your body up to its maximum efficiency, I suppose.
Yeah. But I think that we do need to work on that culture part as well. So we can talk about the medicine, we can talk about the science. But in order to bring this into being the normal way to exercise, we have to get it so that women feel comfortable to go into a gym where women are doing this and feel able to go and pick up a barbell, and have a go. Because a lot of people find that really uncomfortable. And I would say, certainly in my age group, I met with a lot of people saying, I do Pilates, so I do strength training. And Pilates is great. Don't get me wrong, Pilates is brilliant. Having core strength protects your back, which is really important. It can help with your pelvic floor, which is also really important. There is no doubt that Pilates is a positive, but it's not instead of. Okay, to me, it's an as well as. Okay, just like mobility is as well as. You want to be able to do things that keep your joints moving and flexible so that you have enough flexibility to do the things that you want to do in later life. But Pilates isn't strength training.
No, that's a really important point. And I also like that you mentioned, based off of your genes, actually, not every person will fit a certain body shape that aligns with their own biology. And you can see that with twin studies, where if you take identical twins and you purposely feed them up so they all gain weight in the exact same places. So the way our bodies are shaped, it's heavily, heavily genetic. So if we're all trying to create the exact same body shape that's in society, that we've decided that this shape is the ideal, you're never going to be able to recreate that for everyone in a healthy way. And so moving away from that culture where on TikTok and Instagram, it's only a certain type of person who's lifting weights in the gym for women. And you might think, oh, why don't I look like that person? So I'm just not that type of person. Actually, there's no type of person who needs strength training because everyone needs it, basically.
Absolutely. And I think there's two comments there. Firstly, as a society, we have totally accepted that height is just the way you are. But we haven't done that on width. Okay, if you're going to simplify things hugely, well, why not? We've accepted it for height.
I really love when you break it down, because when it comes to someone's height, you assume, oh, that's entirely genetic, when actually it's not entirely genetic. Being exposed to lots of ultra-processed foods in childhood can stunt that height, but no one really criticizes an individual for their height. But then on the flip side, a body shape is heavily decided by your genes, on average on 70%, but it depends on various other variables. It can be more, it can be less. And it's influenced by lifestyle, but there's a talk between those genes and your environment, and we need to move away from this completely outdated stigma, because it's holding people back from engaging, like we've talked about, in something that could be really transformational for them.
Yeah, and part of those genetic things are to do with how your body works. So, for example, the type of muscle fibers you have. It's not just as simple as this is your genetic program and tough luck. There's always things you can do to make your body shape a healthier version of that body shape. You see what I mean? So it's not just 70% of it's your genetics. So if you're not happy with your body shape, get used to it. It's more this is your body shape. Well, the other 30% you can control, and so you can tweak things so that you end up a healthier version of your body shape. That's not the same as saying a bikini body version of your body shape, because actually, although, it is nice to feel confident in that situation, it shouldn't really be our goal.
No, the goal should always be health, ultimately. And that's something that, especially more recently, we're having this societal shift back to beauty standards that we saw kind of in the 90s. And that's such a shame, because it felt like we'd come a long way from that.
Yeah, I agree. And although you say the goal should always be health, I would pull you up on that and say health as a statement of its own is a really hard goal to try to aspire to. I'd turn that round and say that if health is reworded as energy and the ability to do all the fun things that you love doing that make you really happy, then suddenly it's a goal that you think, actually, I want that. Okay, health isn't just your blood tests once a year look okay. It's actually what you do with it and the fun life that you can lead if you feel good.
Yeah, and that's why we spend so much time talking about quality of life. It's and you mentioned that you don't just want a long life. What's the point in having a long life if if you have no quality of life? Then there's no real point. But exercise is a very meaningful insurance policy for that quality of life.
And it's really good for your mental health as well. So, if we all have days where you think, today I just don't feel like it. I just would quite like to just stay at home. I mean, it's been a long day. And those days, sometimes you go to the gym and at the end of it, it's like, well, fine now. And it really does shift how you feel emotionally. Of course, there's some days where you feel a bit like you're swimming through treacle, particularly if you've done lots of training and you're running the risk of overtraining. You can feel a little bit like, I just haven't got it in me today. Of course, there's a bit of that. But in the main, I pretty much never wish I hadn't done exercise. I might think I don't necessarily want to go, but afterwards I never think I wish I hadn't, because it is so good for how we feel inside. And there's a lot of mental health problems in our country at the moment. And I think that exercise and the accessibility of exercise would make an enormous difference. But in order to make that accessibility something that's appealing to the population, you've got to make it fun.
Yeah, and you need that sense of community. And that's something that Daniel Lieberman in his book Exercised. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you'll love it. It's brilliant, because he looks at the kind of evolution and why our ancestors will actually have exercised. And his whole point is that they didn't exercise because the definition of exercise is moving on purpose for health. That's not what we did. We moved if there was a reason. And typically the reason was either it was necessary or it was fun, or both. But it had to be one of those. And what you've created through your gym is a place where it doesn't really feel like a chore for you anymore, because you genuinely want to go, because it's actually fun with that social connection. And I'm guessing because people are expecting you to turn up and you've got that a little bit of social pressure from your friends there and your trainer to turn up on that day, it'd be a bit embarrassing if you didn't. So it feels necessary to you.
Yeah, it does. And, you go and you don't necessarily know who's going to be in the class that day. You turn up, it's like, oh, I haven't seen you for ages. How are you? And there is that sort of social part. But really clearly there wasn't when we first went. This isn't a gym I went to and already had friends before I got there. This is a gym where I've got to know people through being there. And, I don't necessarily know everyone well, but I know them well enough that it's a really nice place to go. And it's a nice place to feel like we're all just doing our thing. And everything and everyone is to be celebrated. And there's people in there who can do the most extraordinary stuff. You sort of arrive and there'll be a man walking on his hands from one end of the gym to the other. You think, I'm never going to be able to do that. Aren't they amazing that they can do that? And everyone celebrates everybody's wins. Okay, because for some people, just turning up is a win. Other people, the first time they can do 10 burpees in a row is a win. Lifting a certain weight is a win. But it's celebrating everybody where they're at.
Yeah, no, you're right that you can't just assume that you're going to have that social connection immediately. That takes time. But I just wanted to pull up a point that you started with, that when you were going through this experience yourself, you didn't love it to begin with, because actually first you have to build up your fitness. And what's really interesting, again, pulling up on the book Exercise, there's some science behind that, because a lot of those chemicals that are released from your muscles that go directly to your brain and have similar effects to ecstasy, morphine or opiates, marijuana, dopamine, all of those sorts of endorphins, all of those feel-good chemicals that are released, they're a bit sluggish to begin with if you're not fit. So you actually need to build up a certain level of fitness before you can even release them properly. And I think that's a hugely motivating thing for people to know. If they've already had the experience that, I don't like exercise, I've tried it, it's always just miserable for me. If that's the case for you, that's because you haven't gone over that little hurdle where it's uncomfortable. But once you reach that level, then it starts actually being addictive, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you have to find the thing that's right for you. If you, for example, if you've got a balance issue, then things that require you to balance are never going to feel comfortable. So you might prefer to do things like go to a bouldering wall and climb up a wall, which uses huge amounts of strength, and you can get some amazing skills and meet people who are similar to you and enjoy it. That might suit you more. So finding what you enjoy is important. But you're absolutely right. Not only do you need to get from I can't do it and I'm nervous, because let's face it, going into somewhere that's new is quite scary. You then have to move into the willingness to learn something new. And actually I really enjoy that learning something new part. But then you also have to accept that, if you're ill and you're unable to train for a couple of weeks, for example, then you then have to almost go, I don't want to go again, and accept the fact that you'll have to force yourself to go 2 or 3 times after you've been ill, because for some reason it all just sort of drops back, and not just your fitness, but that desire to go. That's normal. It's absolutely normal, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
And it's worth it not just for the future, it's worth it for the now, because we know that it helps with things like dopamine, which is your motivation hormone that makes you feel good. And so just focusing on the goal is probably not going to make you keep going. You have to get to the point where you actually enjoy the process. Okay. Now, that isn't to say that you enjoy every single second of the process. You might not enjoy every second of the process because sometimes it's hard.
I just wanted to pick up and come back to the mental health angle, actually, because that's part of exercise that I find most fascinating when it comes to strength training, again, because of these chemicals that are released. And in a way, what we're recognizing now is that your muscle isn't just there to move your limbs around. It very much behaves like an endocrine organ, releasing all these hormones and chemical messengers. And we've known actually for a long time that there's huge evidence that for moderate depression, for example, exercise is the first line treatment. And when you compare exercise against antidepressants, not only will you have equal results, sometimes the exercise can be better. They did a Cochrane review demonstrating that, which is so mind-blowing. But it's still not something that the vast majority of doctors or even psychiatrists are counselling their patients on. And it's incredible that that's still the case.
Yeah, I think it's improved. I do think it's improved. I think the bringing in of social prescribing has made a difference. And certainly around where I live, it feels like there's been a sea change. There's much more referrals to the local gyms and things like that. But I think we have to be realistic and say, if you have moderate depression, making yourself go and do something that you don't want to do is incredibly hard. So therefore, we have to make it as appealing as possible. So do it in a group. Do it in a way that you feel a bit accountable. And, don't just say, here's your pass to the gym, turn up, because you might never get there.
Yeah.
And creating a new habit can be really hard. And just going and saying, I'm just going to do 10 minutes. Okay. And if all you do is 10 minutes, it's still 10 more minutes than you would have done otherwise. But owning the fact that I don't find this easy, but I'm still going to do it, that takes a lot of strength.
Absolutely. And actually on that note, just 10 minutes, I think there's this misconception that a workout only counts if it's completely exhausting and it's lasted an hour or more. But actually, as little as 10 minutes can make a difference. And if you're doing 10 minutes every day, that's still more than an hour in a week. So, little and often can still make a big difference.
It can still make a big difference. It's that, think about what you're doing, probably get some benefit from doing more. If that's little and often because that's all you want to do, that is still better than not doing it.
Yeah.
Don't let
Absolutely.
that phrase, don't let perfect get in the way of good.
Yeah. And again, that's a cultural issue, isn't it? Because we see so much on social media about people leading these perfect lives. And if you're kind of given this impression that if you can't do what they're doing to their standards, then it's almost not worth even trying. But it has to fit into your own busy lifestyle. And I always tell patients, remember that those fitfluencers or fitness influencers, that is their job. So they're not fitting it in. Yeah, they're not squeezing it in around a 12-hour shift or 9 to 5. That is their job. So of course they can, but you have to fit it into other responsibilities, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be perfect, but as long as you're still showing up, then that's going to make a huge difference for your health. Another group of patients, or another time when I always bring up exercise, and I think it often surprises patients, is when I'm talking to them about their sleep quality, which is obviously one of the core pillars in lifestyle medicine. Is that something that you're doing with yours as well?
Yeah, very much so. Alongside heart rate variability. So if I explain
we
why.
haven't talked about that.
No, we haven't. So heart rate variability it's a buzzword at the moment, and I think people are sometimes unsure what it means. And basically, as you breathe in and out, that has an impact on your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve controls the speed that your heart beats. Okay, that's a simplification. But that means that as you breathe in and out, your heart rate should speed up and slow down. If it is not speeding up and slowing down, that essentially means that your vagal nerve is not doing the job it should do. If it is speeding up and slowing down, then you have what's called a high variability. So the difference between it at its slowest and at its highest is bigger. So you've got more variability. Is that making sense? Yeah?
Yes.
So if you lose that variability, it's less healthy. You tend to find people who've got high heart rate variability sleep better. Okay, because they're generally, it's an indication that their body is in a calmer state.
Their rest and digest state.
Absolutely. So that's the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve is a big part of. The other side of it is the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress, the adrenaline, the noradrenaline, all that sort of fight and flight stuff that is massively stimulated by spending your day on a screen, busy roads, getting stuck in traffic jams, all the modern life stuff. So if your heart rate variability is low, exercise can help to improve it until you overtrain.
Okay.
So you tend to find that your heart rate variability is low, exercise will improve it, and that will help you sleep. If you overdo it, and what I mean by overdoing it is twofold. Firstly, do it too late at night. Okay. Although we'd like you to fit this stuff in, exercising an hour before bed is not going to help you sleep. Right. So you don't want to do it too late at night. You want to let your body have time to relax again afterwards, because you're stimulating your body, you're putting your body out of its comfort zone, and your body then has to get back into its comfort zone. Okay. That helps you sleep. And overtraining doesn't help sleep. By overtraining, it's when you're pushing your body very hard on a day by day by day without having any recovery days. Okay. Recovery days don't have to be rest days. It's a day where you just calm things down, do a little bit of stretching, go for a nice walk on the beach, just gentle days. Okay. And so, but if you're just exercising a sort of standard amount, so you're exercising for an hour, 3 or 4 times a week, you tend to find that improves your heart rate variability and therefore you improve your sleep quality and quantity. So 2 different things, quality and quantity. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But it's also really interesting to think about over-exercising. I know we talked about that affecting menstruation, so you lose your period, and then obviously that's not going to be good for your bone health and fertility. But are there any other times when, and this might sound really surprising to people listening in, do you ever ask your patients to do less exercise or change the type of exercise they're doing?
Yes. So going back to the personal thing, if I over-exercise, I'll come down with something. Okay, because if you over-exercise, it affects your immune system. Okay, so then your immune system gets knocked off. So then that's when you pick up all the coughs and colds. It's just the same as we all know that if you're run down, you tend to pick something up. You ask any teacher, they all seem to get ill in October half term because they've worked incredibly hard for that first half term. They stop and they get something. Over-exercising can do the same thing with your immune system. Okay, so there are people who they go and do some incredibly impressive endurance event and then get quite ill, at which point you have to say, look, we've got to just settle things down a bit, just pull back a bit. Again, it doesn't mean stop, particularly if they're emotionally incredibly driven by exercise and feel better emotionally by doing exercise. You don't have to say stop. You just have to say, just pull it back. You know, it's a bit like your broken TV. If you unplug it and plug it back in again, it'll probably work again. Okay? Well, humans are kind of similar. We sometimes just need to unplug. And then when you plug back in again, you'll work again and you'll probably work better. That's why if you're training for an event, you tend to have a deload week before you actually do the event. So a deload week is where you don't do as much and you let all of your muscle cells repair and you let your body calm and you eat the right food and you do the right things. You tend to perform much better on the day. So allowing your body to have some downtime is really important. I think on a population level, most people need to do more. On an individual level, there are people who need to do less.
I never really thought about the immune angle actually, and the fact that it can make you more vulnerable to infections if you're overdoing it. One area that I find obviously particularly interesting is gut health. And so patients who perhaps they've disrupted their gut microbiome, they've got some leaky gut, digestive issues, you know that the gut-brain axis is probably a little bit strained, or they're not really firing their parasympathetic nervous system appropriately to put them into that beautiful, lovely rest and digest so they can extract nutrients from their food appropriately. For those patients, I'm sometimes actually, for the ones who are super fit and doing quite extreme exercise, I sometimes ask them to swap some of those days over to something more gentle like yoga.
Yeah.
Is that
the same?
Something that you're finding as well?
Yeah, the other thing in that cohort of people is most of the things on the market to help you when you're doing some big exercise thing. So be that electrolyte products or gels, energy gels, things like that. They're generally not good for your microbiome. So, quite often you're doing an endurance event and you're eating stuff along the way or taking a gel along the way that is decimating your microbiome in the process. So you do have to be really careful. It's actually quite hard to find products that are good for your microbiome and also will give you that stimulus and that's the electrolytes and things like that to enable you to perform at your best. Now, if you're just doing an event every 2 or 3 times a year, it's probably all right. But if you're using those for training as well and using them 2 or 3 times a week, then you just need to be careful that you're not using things that have got artificial sweeteners in. And you're not using things that are, very high levels of colorings and chemicals.
Okay, so what do you do personally if you're when you're training up for something and then at the event itself, what are you fueling with?
So on a personal level, before training, I use a high quality plant-based protein powder with a banana and a shot of caffeine. Okay, it's not exciting, but I do like a coffee to keep me going. and there's good evidence that coffee will help with your performance. On the day...
And your microbiome.
On the day, it kind of depends what time of day I'm doing something. So if I've got an event in the morning, then I'll fuel in a different way to if I've got an event in the evening. With the world of high rocks, the events can be any time of day.
And for high rocks, are people having to stop in between and take those gels as well?
So we're getting very specific as to high rocks rules here. With high rocks, there are on the way around, there's water and there's Red Bull. Everything else, you can only have what you carry yourself. So nobody can give you anything.
Right.
So people do sometimes use gels. And there are some decent gels out there. We're not going to do a product placement, but there are some decent gels out there. And a lot of people don't use anything. But obviously, hydration is the most important part.
Okay. And so for an event like that, what do you have while you're in the middle of it?
Water, mainly.
Okay.
A lot of water.
Focus on hydration.
Yeah.
Lots of water. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm not a world expert in high rocks. I love it. It makes me happy. Which when I signed up for it, I didn't think that was what was going to happen. I thought I was doing this because somebody had challenged me to do it, but actually, turned out I kind of love it in what my children call type 2 fun way. At the time you are in a sort of cave surviving it. It's only afterwards it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it feels like such an achievement, doesn't it? Yeah.
And you because it's exactly the same event every time you do it, you can compare your times. So you can literally you can become if you're like me, you can become a complete data geek and compare your times on every single station and every single run. And
I can't see myself doing a high rocks anytime soon, but never say never.
Never say never.
Yeah, but I think that's actually a really important point from my perspective. That when I speak to patients, I always point out, I'm not a hugely athletic person. I'm not a naturally athletic person, but that doesn't mean that I'm not exercising. We should all be doing it, but you need to find a way that works for you. And it's again about that overall message that there's no type of person who needs to be exercising. It's for everyone, but it's about finding an environment and a group of people that you feel comfortable doing it with.
Absolutely. It's like every other part of life that if you find your tribe, it's easier. And you've got to find what you actually enjoy doing. And that might mean trying lots of different things. And, I found my thing, but it took me a long time to find my thing because I wasn't the sporty kid.
Yeah. And to be clear, obviously there are lots of different forms of resistance training that are still going to be good for you, like the yoga and the Pilates that we talked about, even gardening, swimming, but you're specifically advocating for quite heavy lifting that you progressively increase.
I'm advocating for progressive overload. So bit by bit, safely and in a way that is not going to lead to injury, doing things that are heavier. So we're not talking 20 reps of something, because if you can do it 20 times, it's probably not heavy enough. So you want to be able to do it, 5 or 6 times without injuring yourself. Okay, so when you're new to this, you do have to do some lighter, learn the technique stuff. Okay, now that is doing progressive overload training is easier in a gym, whether that's a gym at home or a commercial gym. But there are other ways of doing it, and I think rock climbing is quite a good example. That lots of even small towns now have got bouldering gyms. With those, you do quite a lot of strength work in those, and they're really hard. And the routes are graded in difficulty, and you get stronger and stronger as you go up the gradings. That can be a nice way of doing it. And again, there's a sense of achievement of I couldn't do that route before, and now I can do that route. It's a sense of achievement. So there are more ways to do it. You're absolutely right. Gardening could be a great way of doing it. If you do, we're not talking weeding, we're talking proper heavy gardening. That can be a great way to do it. You've got to find what's right for different people. We can, go for the science and what the science is showing. And I think we need to be really open about that as well. The science of what this does for us as women has come on an awfully long way recently. So in 10 years' time, it's likely to have progressed a lot further, and we'll have a lot more understanding. And I suspect that means we'll have a lot more options that will lead us to the same endpoint, and a lot more ideas of ways to help you get motivated and help you get the best out of it.
Yeah. And actually we've because there are some really interesting aspects that really stood out to us, like the mental health and the brain function, preventing dementia, etc., and hormones and fertility, we've almost skimmed over some of the really important things that most people talk about, which are heart health, reducing your insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and your stroke risk. All of that, it actually goes without saying that, of course, that's all going to be relevant, because if you create a bigger glucose sponge in your body, which is what muscle is, then you're going to really bring down that background insulin. That's going to affect your amount of visceral fat, which is the inflammatory fat that sits around your organs, reduce your overall inflammation, and impact health in loads of different ways that we haven't even elaborated on. We're just assuming that people already knew that.
But also that inflammation, I think, is a really, really important key point that you've just said there, Camilla. So that the way that you bring down your blood sugar because of the muscle, and that then reduces your inflammation, is particularly pertinent for women. So if you look at blood tests that show risk of heart problem in men, the most important blood tests are different to in women. So in women, it's the high sensitivity CRP blood test is the most accurate predictor of future heart issues. So that means that we need to do everything we can to reduce inflammation. And a really good way of doing that is exactly as we've been talking about, is by creating some muscle cells.
Yeah, and then they'll do all the heavy lifting for you, if you excuse the pun. Actually, just the one other group of patients that I always used to bring it up in, and I was the first doctor to mention it, was patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I'd always say to them, I want you to build some muscle mass, please. And they'd be so confused. But again, it all fits in because I want them to reduce their insulin resistance. That's going to have a knock-on effect on the fat deposits in the liver. Boom, boom, boom. It's all interlinked, basically.
And those muscle cells are going to help with the mitogenesis, so making more of those mitochondria. And if you've got lots of really healthy mitochondria, that can reduce your lipids.
I can't believe I haven't already said this. Of course, exercise is going to be good for your microbiome as well, and then that will have a downstream effect on everything else.
So I'm relying on you to say that bit, Camilla. Let's face it. You are the microbiome queen. Therefore, you have to say that line.
I'm the one who's completely obsessed, but no, and we don't even fully understand why that is.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Because one day we will.
One day we will, but we do know it seems to be important for whatever reason. Yeah. So if your only goal is to look after your microbiome, then still do the exercise and the weight training. So to end, I really want people listening in to have some practical takeaways about how to realistically implement this advice in a way that is going to fit into what's going on in real life, whether that's extreme work pressures, perhaps you've got elderly relatives that you're looking after, you've got young children, you're dealing with perimenopausal symptoms, life is just feeling completely overwhelming, and actually the last thing you want to do is go pick up something heavy, put it back down, and then pick it up again. How could you, where do you start, basically?
Firstly, by being kind to yourself. Okay, we always have to start with being kind to ourselves. If you are dealing with elderly parents, dependent children, busy job, all of the above at the same time, then you do what you can. Okay, you don't beat yourself up if this is a chapter in your life that is not the chapter that you can do this in. Okay, there are different. Everything's a season. It may be that you can't do it this month, but maybe next month you could look at it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is making sure you don't get injured. Okay, so if you know you've got issues with certain joints, start small, start gently. We know that if you've got something like an arthritis, then getting some muscle around that joint will protect you and improve the symptoms. But it won't on day one if you overdo it. Okay, so start slowly, start gently. Get some steering, some guidance. You can either join a gym or ask for a referral. If you've got a health problem, your GP may be able to refer you to a local gym so that you've got some guidance and some support and some practical tips. And that sense of overwhelm that you've just alluded to. If you have a sense of overwhelm, it's a different thing to stress. So overwhelm is where it feels like there's hundreds of things going on in your life that you simply can't control. One of the really good ways of helping yourself with overwhelm is to find something you can control. And although it sounds like I'm putting yet another job in your bucket to add to this overwhelming number of jobs you've got to do, actually doing something that you are controlling can reduce that sense of overwhelm. So if you think this is important to you, then you say, okay, I'm going to control this. I'm going to 3 times a week do 10 minutes in my day, and I'm going to do this bit of strength training. There's plenty of videos out there. There's plenty of experts out there. And I'm going to do that 3 times a week. Start small, okay? But making that sort of deal with yourself of I'm going to control what I can control can actually be surprisingly powerful. And then the last thing I'd say is creating a new habit can be quite difficult. So to create a new habit, they generally say latch it onto an old habit. So, there is on YouTube, I think it's a 5 minutes kitchen strength workout. Well, you can do that when you're boiling the kettle in the morning to make a cup of tea. Okay, because you know you're going to boil the kettle in the morning. So if you know you're going to do that, you could add it in as an extra in addition to that. Does that make sense? So adding something onto something you're already doing. So when I started doing this, I used to pick my daughter up from school and do it on the way back because she happened to come with me. And doing it on the way back meant I had accountability and a time when I knew I was going to do it because it was the same time every week. Putting it into the structure you've already got can be quite helpful.
Yeah, no, that's genius. And if anyone hasn't already, I highly recommend reading Atomic Habits because that
absolutely
really summarizes beautifully some ways of kind of almost tricking you into starting new habits and kind of making it feel much more natural. My technique was I kept my free weights in the bathroom, and at the time I had quite a big bathroom. And so my rule was I wasn't allowed to have a shower that day until I did weights. So I would just quickly do some weights. And that, I mean, if that's your rule, it's actually, it's unpleasant not to have a shower. And I really stuck to it. And then the shower would be the reward. And it might sound completely ridiculous. It was actually my mother who inspired me to do that. But if the weights are in your bathroom, 10 minutes really isn't that much time. So you just quickly force yourself to do those 10 minutes. You always feel better after you've done it. And then boom. And I love what you said about the overwhelm, that this isn't actually about adding to your overwhelm because you're giving yourself one decision that you can control. And that's so empowering when you stay true to yourself and you keep your promise to yourself. That actually motivates you so much more and makes life feel a little bit less overwhelming.
Yeah, and the phrase self-care is bandied about a lot at the moment in culture. But actually, if you turn that round and just say, there's things that we do for people that we love that we don't do for ourselves. And if you say, look, if you love somebody else, if somebody else was saying, I've got a family history of dementia, for example, and I know exercise would make a difference, then you would immediately say, get out there now and do some, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And yet, for ourselves, we find it much harder to do that. So actually, you deserve a little bit of love. And sometimes just giving that little bit of love to yourself can be really helpful.
Yes. My other way of motivating patients was to talk about their children. So if there was a patient who had young children, I would say there's a lot of evidence showing that children are much more likely to go on to exercise in adulthood if they've seen their parents exercising. So if you don't want to do this for yourself, then do it for your children, because I'm guessing you want them to have a good quality of life and to prevent their future risk of disease. Then you're setting the example, and why else would they do it? And make sure you kind of make it quite clear to them that you're doing it. Either they witness you doing it, or you make a point like, oh, I'm going to my gym class now, so that it becomes part of your family's culture, and only you can be the one to start that.
And they may well pull away from it for a few years because it's important when you're becoming a young adult that you do life differently to your parents. It's funny what you come back to, though.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Oh, I think that's been such an eye-opening conversation. There are things that I just you didn't even tell me about in advance, so you had the element of surprise for me.
Well, good.
Especially that bit about the mitochondria.
It's, as I'm sure you can pick up, it's a topic close to my heart. But I think it's close to my heart partly because I see the science and the difference it makes, but also I feel it on a very personal level, the difference it's made to me as that kid who was so rubbish at sport, and also someone who did lots of running. I feel far healthier doing this than I did then.
Yeah, and it's obviously had a huge impact on your life in loads of ways that are probably impossible to measure.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andie. This has been great.
Thank you,
I look forward to our next podcast.
Absolutely. We'll have to start thinking about the next topic and we'll do one soon.